Welcome to LabMinutes.com. In the previous video, we dealt with Cisco ISE posture assessment on users that have NAC Agent installed. What if you have like a guest that is on site for just a day and need internet access? They probably don't want to have the NAC Agent installed on their machines. Fortunately, Cisco ISE has Web Agent that does not require permanent installations and only runs at the time of the login. And this is our topic in this video. Here's our lab setup. So here we have Cisco ISE running version 112 at the IP of .102, and we have a domain controller at the IP .40. So we're going to have a guest user bring in his computer and trying to connect to the network on the VLANs, first on this VLAN 64. And before we allow them access to the network, we want to check and make sure that they have some kind of antivirus, anti-spyware installed. And once they have been proved to be compliant, we'll make sure that they just have internet access only, as well as we're going to be switching the user to VLAN 65, which is our guest VLAN. But if the user turns out not to be in compliance, we're just going to put it back and present the web login, and we're not going to give them a chance to remediate since there's no way for us to know in advance what kind of software they need to download, so we cannot come up with the accurate access list for that. So we're just going to skip the remediation process. Since we're going to be doing guest login, let's start our configuration with guests. So we're going to make a quick adjustment on the guest portal. So under administration and web portal management and settings. So this is where you will put the majority of the config related to guests, but we're not going to dive into too much details since we have a separate video dedicated for the sponsor guest and guest login process. But just for the purpose of this lab, we're just going to make enough change so we can complete the lab. So here under guest and multi-portal configuration, and there's a default guest portal. So we're just going to use the default under operation. Here we'll leave everything at default, and we're going to check and make sure the guest can download posture client as well as performing self-service, just to make our life easier when we create a guest account. And since we're going to be switching guest VLAN, we want to make sure that they can do a release renew to obtain the new IP and the new VLAN. Then we'll click save, and let's make one more tweak, which is under username policy. Let's use the email address for the username. Okay, so now that have that saved, we can go back to the policy authentication. Since the guest will be coming in using WireMap, so we need to have a WireMap rule configured, which we did. Was just using the default WireMap with the default allow protocol, and most importantly under internal endpoint for the if user not found, you have to make sure it's continue. So when the MAC address comes in, we can continue onto the authorization and just allow the authentication to succeed. Okay, now for authorization, we'll go to policy and conditions. The only condition that we need is to look for the posture status and make sure the client is in compliance. So we'll create one for that, and the name we will use LM wired guest compliant, and create new condition. And we'll look for session posture status being compliant. The next condition is to make sure it's a guest type of login. So under network access, use case, specify guest flow, and the last condition is to make sure it's a wire authentication. So conditioning based on device type of a switch. Okay, submit. And then we'll go under the results for authorizations. We're going to be reusing the downloadable ACL that we have created in the previous NAC Agent video. And the two that we will use is one for LM ISE that allows access to ISE, and DHCP DNS is a standard, although we're not going to be using this one that allows to the CLAM website. And this is for when the user first encounter a login page so they can download the agent. And the other one we will use is the internal only, and when the user is proved to be compliant, then we will allow them access to the internet. So reusing that, now we can create an authorization profile. So the first profile that we are creating is for once the guest is in compliant. So we call it LM wired guest compliant, and we're just enforcing a dACL of internet only. And at the same time, we want to, like we mentioned in the beginning of the video, we want to switch them to VLAN 65. And if you watch our NAC Agent video, we were using the VLAN ID. But here, we're going to try to give it use a VLAN name instead, and that comes very handy if you want to span or have a multiple guest VLAN across your network and that has different VLAN ID. What you can do is to make sure that the VLAN name is consistent across all those VLANs. Then you can just specify that VLAN name right here, and using that same authorization profiles. Okay, then we need to create one more for the CWA. So it's the guest login page. So we're going to call it LM wired CWA. For dACL, we only allow access to ISE, and we want to make sure we present the web authentication. So here, this box right here, ACL, is supposed to be a redirect ACL that we already have created on the switch. So here on the switch, just to show we have one created for ACL redirect clam. So usually the redirect ACL is just a reversed as far as permit become denied become permits of your dACL. So what it is you'd specify what kind of traffic you do not want to redirect to the ISE portal page. So here we do not want to redirect, for example, DHCP, DNS, any traffic to ISE. And if you were to allow like going to website, you can download the software, then you probably want to deny that as well. So here we're using ACL redirect claim, paste, and for the redirect portal, we will be using the default that we were making the adjustment previously. Okay, so submit. Now that we have both conditions and results, we can go back and complete our authorization rules. You can see here, these are the one that we did in the previous NAC Agent video. So we're just gonna continue from that. So insert rule below. This one is for guest that's being compliant. So we call it LM wired guest compliant condition. We have already created a condition, so we'll select from library, and I believe we use the same name, so wired guest compliant, and we also have the exact same name for authorization profile, so wired guest compliant. And then we'll add one more. This is for our catch-all login page. For CWA, so let's call it LM wired CWA, and condition, just gonna look for traffic coming from, or authentication that's coming from the switch. So device type equal switch, and then we'll give them the wire CWA authorization profile. Okay, so with that saved, now we need to configure basically to specify what kind of users and what kind of agents you want the user to download. So here, this is from the previous video, we allow a domain users to download the NAC agent, but here we have a guest user. So let's call the rule LM Web Agent. Since we're using Windows as our test machine, we'll specify as Wins, and the operating system, we'll make it Windows all. Looks like we duplicate instead of add, so let's delete that conditions. And for the results, let's kind of clear this out. And all we need is, instead of NAC agent, we want to give a user to download the web agent. So web agent, pick the latest one. Actually, condition, we want to put a guest flow. So use case, guest flow specifies the type of guest login. So save. Now the last thing we need to configure is the posture. You can see how I have the two tabs open. It's kind of handy. You can switch back and forth and not having to wait for one of them to finish saving. So you can continue with the configuration. So now we need to create a posture conditions to look for an AV and AS installation on the guest machine. So let's call this one Wins Guest AV. Operating system is Windows all, and again conditioning based on guest type of login. guest flow. And here, if you recall from the previous NAC Agent video, we actually have to go on through creating all the posture, condition, and remediation and requirements, since we were doing something that is not provided by the default requirements. But here, since we're just doing a generic search for an AV and AS installation of any vendor, we can just pick the one from the default. Here we have any AS installation win. That would be one, and the second one is any AV installation win. Okay, before we click done, let's disable that rule for now. We'll come back and enable it in a second here. Save. Okay, so with all of those configured, we are now ready to start our testing. Okay, so let's bring up our guest test machine. So we currently have the LAN interface disabled. So before I go ahead and enable that, let's bring up the authentication monitoring page. Okay, and now let's also look at the switch port status real quick. Okay, so let's do shut, no shut, just to clear the port state. Shut, no shut, and at the same time enable the LAN interface. And here you can see we're already hitting the CWA authorization rule and profile. So if you go and open a web browser, you can see that we are redirected to the guest portal login page. So the first thing we need to do before we can log in is to create a guest account, since we enable the self-service. So let's click on self-service, and we do not have any of these fields set as mandatory, so all we need to enter really is the email address at this point. So let's call it john@labminutes.com, because email address is going to be used as the username, so that's the only field we need to fill out. And let's set it to US specific, and then submit. And now we have a password and account generated, so let's kind of copy and paste that into the notepad. John LabMinutes, and that's the password. So I will click OK. We go back. Still have the password copy, and I'm going to go and paste the username. And now we at the acceptable use policy page, so we click accept. Looks like we have a little issue here with the session expires, so we can try that one more time. Copy and paste. Okay, so it looks like we still have that issue. Actually, I'm kind of glad that it happened, so I can show you how to quickly fix that if you come across that issue. So what you need to do, you can go to Operations and Catalog, and under Session Directories, and Radius Active Session. Now we can locate the particular session that we need to fix, and we know that one is right here with the MAC address. So if you scroll down to the right a little bit, there's a little COA column with the icon that's clickable. So if you click on that, you can just terminate the session and allow the client to form a new session or create a new sessions. So with that's done, let's try it one more time. Bring that up. Okay, copy and paste. So you can see here we're now successfully logged in without that session expired error, and we are being asked to install Agent. So go ahead and click install. Okay, so it's now downloading Cisco Agent. So click yes. We'll give it a few seconds for the agent to run. Alright, so we got a little popped up window with the NAC Web Agent, and it's saying the agent is currently scanning your system. Okay, and now it says configuring, so we know that the posture, we are actually now in compliant if it starts configuring your network like that. So if you go back to the monitor page and then refresh, you can see the posture status have turned into compliant, as well as the guest LM Internet dACL has been pushed out. Okay, so let's do a quick check on the status of the port. And now you can see that the ACL, earlier we were stuck on the URL redirect, and here we have the internet only ACL applying to the port and the user with the username right here. And if you also notice one more thing is the VLAN has become 65. So right here, VLAN policy 65, which is our guest VLAN that we specify by name. And the IPs also has been changed to the .65 subnet. So here, if we go back and take a look at the authentication detail, and while we wait for that to come up, so I want to pull up or switch to the posture. Okay, so now the authentication detail authorized only succeeded with the guest, it hit the guest compliant rule that we created, and these are all the radius attribute that's been returned to the switch. And one of those is the VLAN group, as we specified by name guest, and the downloadable ACL. You can see use case, this one is guest flow. You can see it's already in compliant, and if you switch to the posture detail assessment, we also get a little green lock here that said posture receive posture report with the NAC Web Agent. Okay, we'll come back and revisit this in a little bit. So now that our machine is actually in compliant, we should have network access. So if you go to cisco.com, you can see we can access the website. All right, so far we haven't really enforced any posture policies. So right now, so far we tested the capability of downloading Web Agent and successfully log in without having to check for any policy. So now let's go back to our policy page, and that since we have the rule disable, so we're gonna enable that and click save. Gonna have to force ourselves out of the network. So we can actually let's go back to the session directory page and see if we can remove or terminate the session this way one more time. So now you can see how that got changed with the active session. We got the actual username. The authentication method is WebAuth now. Posture status is compliant. So let's see if we can force this out using this tool here. So session termination, click run. We'll go back and see if it took effect yet. You can see COA went out for terminating session or telling the switch to terminate the session. So let's try to open this back up. Okay, so now we're back on the guest portal page. So let's log in one more time using our guest account here. So let's try to run that NAC agent one more time. Okay, click yes. We'll just let it run and let it do its thing. Now scanning the system, we'll see what it comes back with. Okay, so now that we have enabled the posture policies to look for the antivirus installation, you can see that we are now failing because we currently do not have AV install, but on the other hand, we have the anti-spyware install. So now, basically NAC is telling you it's telling you that you cannot get onto the network unless you basically remediate this issue. And by default, it gives you 4 minutes to do that. And again, obviously, unless they, like we do here, have an antivirus software file that we can install on the fly, there's no way that you can know in advance what website you need to allow the guest to access to download that. So there's not much you can do there. But for here, we're gonna go ahead and install ClamWin as part of our remediation. So next and next. Just going to click through that quickly. We're not going to download since we're not checking for the latest definition update. We'll let it install and we'll click finish. And you can try to do a rescan, but most of the time I don't really see it works. So we might need to restart our session or disconnect and reconnect, but let's give this a try. Okay, so it looks like that did not work, so let's go ahead and cancel. And that should put us back to the web login page. Let's go back here. Refresh, can see our posture at this point is non-compliant, and we get thrown back into the CWA. So if you launch, right here it came back and said failed to log into the network. So if you close that out, launch it, let's log in. Now that we have the antivirus software installed, we'll run that one more time. Yes. Okay, now scanning system again. Okay, now looks like it's went into completion since it's configuring the system right now. Go back to refresh. There you go. We've got our guest compliant authorization profile, and at the same time it came back to successfully log into the network. And if we go to cisco.com, sure enough we had network access. And to confirm, we are again got switched to VLAN 65 since we are in compliant at this point. And the switch should tell you pretty much the same thing if you look at the port status. Again, VLAN 65 or IP from VLAN 65, username, VLAN 65, and dACL with LM internet only. Okay, now go back to the posture and detail assessment and look at the latest one. You can see here this is the one that failed. Let's look at the one that failed first. Okay, so username, the MAC address, IP address, system name, and the version of the type of agent and the version of the agent. So Web Agent for Windows. And you can see how it looks through your machine and identify the software. Okay, although this one, it found the antivirus. This is where we click the rescan, I guess. Although it found the antivirus, it still came back as fail. But if you go back and look at the one that passed, same kind of information, antivirus with the definition version, update, so you got the anti-spyware, the status of being compliant, and the checks that we made, which the guest machine passed both. Okay, so that should wrap up our video on posture assessment with Cisco ISE NAC Web Agent. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com. I'll see you guys in the next video.